Going into the new millennium, Final Fantasy was going into a new era with the PlayStation 2. This was going to bring many new changes to the IP within the next several games. Square's first game on the new console was Final Fantasy X. With this game, a lot of new ideas were introduced to the players, such as a new battle system, a unique world, and of course, a brand new story. Today, we'll be looking at some of those aspects from Final Fantasy X that made their way into Final Fantasy XIV. So without further ado, this is Final Fantasy X references in Final Fantasy XIV. As always, there will be spoilers for both Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy XIV, including another spoiler for Endwalker at the end of the video. So consider this your spoiler warning. Final Fantasy X was first released on the PlayStation 2 in 2001. The story follows a man named Tidus who is transported into the world of Spira. In this world, he meets a summoner named Yuna, who is on her pilgrimage to defeat Sin. Tidus and Yuna's outfits are available in Final Fantasy XIV. They were originally given out to the attendees of the 2016 FanFest and are now available on the MOG station. There were also 3 minions from this FanFest: Yuna, Riku, and Lulu. These are also available on the MOG station. A few other things before we move on. The Gladiator/Paladin stance has a striking similarity to Tidus' battle stance in Final Fantasy X. The White Mage Zodiac weapon is named after Yuna's celestial weapon, the Nirvana. And finally, although not quite the same animation, but the animation for Y'shtola's Spiritual Ray, which was first seen in Heavensward, but also seen in later expansions including Endwalker with Kane Senna performing the animation, bears a resemblance to Yuna's sending. This could be a coincidence, however, because they're not exactly the same, but I've seen this mentioned online, so I thought I would include it in this video. A playable race of feline humanoids introduced in Shadowbringers is known as the Hrothgar. Their appearance is based off the race known as the Ronso in Final Fantasy X. In fact, on the first, the Hrothgar are known as the Ronso. In Amarang, there are several locations with names based off of Ronso characters from Final Fantasy X. The first is the Ruins of Kelk, which is named after Maester Kelk, a Ronso who follows the teachings of Yevon. The next location is the Mount Biran Mines, named after Biran Ronso, a childhood rival to Kimahri. Our next location is Nuvi's Leavings, named after Nuvi Ronso, a Blitzball player for the Ronso Fangs. And finally, our last location, Garrick, named after Garrick Ronso, a storekeeper in Final Fantasy X, and becomes a boss battle in Final Fantasy X too. In Final Fantasy XIV, the Garlean machines are known as Machina. This name first appeared in Final Fantasy X, specifically referring to the technology used prior to Sin's arrival on Spira, and the technology used by the Albad. In A Realm Reborn, there is a quest known as Tales from the Tidus Slayer. In this quest, there is a Rogadin that mistakenly calls the Primal Titan as Tidus. At the final boss of Tamtara, this location is known as the Eternal Calm. This name comes from Final Fantasy X, specifically referring to the era after Sin's defeat, in which Sin no longer torments the citizens of Spira. In the Stormblood Summoner quest, during the final battle with Sari, he is given the title of High Summoner. High Summoner was first used in Final Fantasy X, given to those who defeated Sin and brought a calm to Spira. While in the Final Fantasy VII video, I state that Amrot in the Tempest bears a similarity to the City of Ancients from Final Fantasy VII, including using the term Ancients in both games to describe the long-lost civilization in both games. Amrot also has a similarity to Dream Zanarkand as well, in which both locations were brought back to preserve the memories of each location. The citizens within both cities are unaware of the true nature of the dreamlike city that exists in both worlds. In the Weeping City of Mach, there is a boss named Forgal. In this fight, there is a raid-wide attack known as Megadeath. To survive this, you must step into certain puddles to gain the zombification debuff. This allows the player to survive the otherwise lethal attack. This mechanic comes from the Yuna fight, where she inflicts zombie status onto the players, and it is the only way to survive her Megadeath attack later on in the fight. A quick note that in the Akafa Amphitheater, Shiva will snap during Diamond Dust. This snap actually originated from Final Fantasy X, in which she will snap during Diamond Dust to shatter the ice around the enemies. Yojimbo and his dog Daigoro from Final Fantasy X make their appearance in Final Fantasy XIV. His first appearance is at the final boss battle in the dungeon Kugane Castle. Yojimbo will perform his signature move, Zanmato, within this fight. Yojimbo again reappears during the Stormblood Hildebrand quest as his own trial. And finally, he appears in his own gate in the Gold Saucer in The Slice is Right. The summon Ixion, which serves as the Thunder Summon in Final Fantasy X, appears in Final Fantasy XIV as a special fate boss in the Locks. Completing this fate awards Ixion Horns, in which this can be traded for several items, which include the Ixion Mount, the Ixion Minion, a Chocobo Barding, and the housing item, the Ixion Horn. In Eden's vs. Fulmination, we face off against a hybrid of Ramuh and Ixion. The area around this arena is known as the Gandalf Thunder Plains, which is the same name as the Thunder Plains found in Final Fantasy X. In fact, you can even see what seems to be Rin's travel agency in the background. Gandalf also refers to the High Summoner Gandalf. This High Summoner was one of the first to defeat Sin and brought a calm to Spira of 400 years. And finally, this next part is a spoiler for Endwalker, so this will be the last spoiler warning. The final boss of the Tower of Babel is known as Anima. Anima first appeared in Final Fantasy X as one of Maester Seymour's Aeons. In fact, Anima was created from Seymour's mother sacrificing herself in order for Seymour to obtain his final Aeon. In Final Fantasy XIV, Anima was created from Xenos' deceased father, Varus. Anima has several attacks that come from Final Fantasy X, including many variations of its spell Pain. And when fighting its lower half, once it's defeated, it will use Oblivion, which is the same name as Anima's Overdrive in Final Fantasy X. After defeating this boss, the wind-up Anima minion has a chance of appearing in a chest at the end of the dungeon. Final Fantasy X brought about a unique emotional story to the Final Fantasy series. Many of its ideas and concepts were never before seen in the franchise, and the game was the start of a new era for the Final Fantasy franchise going forward. This game also brought about many new fans due to its incredible story and memorable characters, and a lot of these aspects are still seen today within Final Fantasy XIV. Now, let me take the time to just say, I will admit it's a shame that this video isn't as long as the other ones. I feel as though because there was no raid, alliance dungeons, extreme trials, or any major content dedicated to Final Fantasy X, we didn't get as many references as the other games in the series. My hope is that in the future patches or expansions, it focuses on Final Fantasy X in some capacity. But until then, we'll just have to wait. Anyway, as always, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It will always be appreciated. And in the next video, we'll be looking at the world of Final Fantasy XI.